Sleeping Beauty as told by Princess Aurora. Briar Rose. I didn't like my name, I never did. It sounded so, well, simple. Briar Rose. I imagine people saying with a chuckle, just sprinkle water on her head and flowers will grow out her ears. It made me mad just thinking about it. I may have grown up in the woods, but I'm no country bumpkin. I'm a lot smarter than folks might think. There was that morning, for instance, when my aunts asked me to go berry picking. We need berries, Aunt Meriwether declared, clear out of the blue. She picked up a basket and pushed it into my hands. Yes, lots and lots of berries, Aunt Fauna agreed. We're, gonna make blackberry jam. That's right, a whole barrelful. Well, I saw right through their game. The day before, I had picked berries until my fingers turned purple. If you looked in our cellar, you would have found enough blackberries to give a bear a bellyache. So I knew they were just trying to get me out of the house. But for the life of me, I couldn't think why. After all, it was my 16th birthday. You'd think they would do something nice, like throw a little party, or at least sing happy birthday. But they just hustled me out of the cottage, then stood there in the doorway, waving goodbye. Now, don't hurry back, Aunt Flora said. But don't go too far, Aunt Meriwether chimed in. And don't speak to any strangers, Aunt Flora added. She always said the same thing when I left the house. I've lived with my aunts in the old woodcutter's cottage ever since I was a tiny baby. Aunt Flora says they found me in the garden under a cabbage leaf. Of course, she's just pulling my leg. I know the stork brought me just like everyone else. They are dear, sweet women, like mothers to me, but they could be just a teensy bit strict. Like that rule about strangers. If I ever met someone I didn't know in the forest, I was to turn around and walk straight home without as much as a howdy do. Aunt Flora said there were hideous goblins nearby and wicked fairies who wanted to do me harm. But I'm no dummy. I knew what they were really afraid of. They were afraid I'd meet a boy. Well, I thought they didn't have to worry about that. I had searched every nook and cranny of that forest, and if there was one thing I was sure about, it was this. There were no boys in those woods. That special someone. As I walked toward my favorite blackberry patch, swinging my berry bucket, sweet little songbirds circled my head, twittering cheerfully. Bunny rabbits hopped along at my heels, and an owl hooted at me from the trees. What could be better than sunshine, fresh air, and a walk in the woods with my little forest friends, I thought. Then I noticed something strange. All the rabbits were hopping along in pairs. I looked around. The squirrels were snuggling. The chipmunks were cuddling. Even the quail looked as cozy as lovebirds. Everyone in the forest had found someone special. Everyone, that is, except for me. With a heavy sigh, I sat down on a mossy rock. Would I ever leave this deep, dark forest, I wondered? Would I ever meet my own special someone? Why do they still treat me like a child, I pondered aloud. Hooty, the owl hooted. I was glad he asked. Aunts Flora and Fauna and Meriwether, I explained. They never wanted me to meet anyone. The animals gathered around me, emitting concerned squeaks. A chipmunk nudged my ankle. The quail cooed sympathetically. Now, Rose, they seemed to say, don't be sad. Think of the berry basket as half full, not half empty. They're right, I told myself. After all, I was young and healthy. I had an entire forest full of cute and cuddly friends. And what's more, I did have someone special. That's when I let the animals in on a little secret. But I've fooled my aunts, I told them. I had met someone. The sparrows tittered. The squirrels picked up their ears. Those little animals just love gossip. Who, the owl wanted to know. So I told them all about a prince I knew. He's tall and handsome and so romantic, I gushed. We walk together and talk together, and just before we say goodbye, he takes me in his arms, and then I paused. The animals leaned forward, winking their beady little eyes. It was so quiet you could have heard a pine needle drop. And then I wake up, I finished. There were squeals and squawks of disappointment. Yes, it's only in my dreams, I confess, but they say if you dream a thing more than once, it's sure to come true. The owl slowly blinked. The rabbits wiggled their little noses skeptically. Oh, I don't believe it either, I assured them. I should think you have to dream a thing 9 or 10 times before it comes true. But you know, I'm already up to 8. And then I closed my eyes and recalled my dream prince. He had twinkling eyes and a kind smile, and his hair was soft as silk. He took me in his arms and looked into my eyes. Then he leaned forward and thump. My eyes flew open. Was it my imagination, or had I heard the sound of a footstep? Thump. There it was again. I looked around and gasped as a stranger stepped out of the bushes. the man of my dreams. He wore soft leather boots and a flowing cloak made of fine red wool, a dashing felt hat that sat at a rakish angle on his head, and he walked with a funny hop in his step. I was certain I'd never seen him before, yet when I peered beneath the brim of his hat, his sharp eyes seemed familiar, and I thought I recognized his beaky nose. Who? The stranger asked. It was the owl dressed up in a cloak and hat. Two little birds held up the edges of his cloak as if a pair of shoulders sat beneath it. Below, on the ground, two rabbits hopped up and down inside a pair of boots, as if they were dancing a jig. Why, it's my dream prince, I cried, pretending to be astonished. The owl dipped his head, bowing to me. I curtsied back, then grabbed him by the collar. I began to sing and waltz through the woods, just as if he really was my dream prince. And then it happened. As I twirled around an oak tree singing a high note, the owl suddenly joined in on harmony. My, that owl has a nice tenor voice, I thought. And then I thought, owls can't sing. I whirled around. There, standing right in front of me, was a tall young man. And was he ever a mess? His clothes were muddy and his hair was full of leaves, yet his brown eyes shone like agates. And when he smiled, his dimples looked deep enough to plant corn in. I was so startled I nearly tumbled into a blackberry bush. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to frighten you. It wasn't that, I said, feeling flustered. It's just that you're awfully cute, I was thinking. A stranger, he said. That too, I thought. Suddenly all my aunt's warnings about strangers flashed into my head, but they flashed right out again a second later because the young man took my hand, and before I knew what was happening, I was waltzing through the forest in his arms. And do you know what? He was an excellent dancer. As we waltzed through the glade, I asked him what he was doing in the forest. I was just riding by, he told me. I'm a prince from the next kingdom over. I looked at his messy hair and muddy clothes. He couldn't fool me. Ha ha, I replied, and I'm a princess. We both got a good laugh out of that one. We stopped to rest on a shady overlook. Somehow his arm slipped around my back and my head ended up on his shoulder. Who are you? What's your name? He murmured into my hair. My name? Oh, it's I began. Then I reconsidered. What if he thought I was just some country bumpkin? I decided it would be better to remain a bit mysterious. I can't tell you, I said, grabbing my basket and shawl. I sprang to my feet and began to run back through the trees. But when will I see you again? The young man called after me. Oh, never, never, I cried. Then again, maybe never was a bit too mysterious. On second thought, this evening, I'd call back over my shoulder, come to the cottage in the glen. And with my heart hopping like a bunny rabbit, I ran home. Surprise! It was late afternoon by the time I reached the cottage, and my basket didn't have enough berries for one single muffin, let alone a whole barrel full of blackberry jam. Would my aunts be angry? I didn't know. I didn't care. I knew that as soon as they saw what a sweet, handsome, well-mannered young man I'd plucked out of the bushes, they'd be very pleased. But when I opened the door, the cottage was dark. Hello, I called. Where is everybody? Then my heart nearly jumped out of my chest for the second time that day, for on the kitchen table sat a towering pink and blue birthday cake with 16 candles flickering on top, and next to it, draped over a chair, was a brand new blue dress in exactly my size. Surprise! 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 My aunts cried, leaping out from behind the stairwell. I should have known then that something was wrong. My aunts are the sweetest women in the world, but they can't cook or clean or darn a sock to save their lives. And I knew for certain no bakeries delivered to our neck of the woods. But at that moment my mind was on other things. Oh, my dears, I said, giving each of them a hug, this is the happiest day of my life. Just wait till you meet him. The gale force of their gasp could have knocked down a small forest. Him? Rose? You've met some stranger? Actually, he's an old friend, I hastily explained. We met ages ago. Once upon a dream. Aunt Flora bit her lip. Aunt Fauna wrung her hands. Aunt Merriweather looked like she might cry. I could see they weren't buying that argument. And, anyway, I am 16, I quickly added. Then I got my second birthday surprise of the day. My aunts told me I was already betrothed. Betrothed, I hollered. I always known my aunts were strict about boys, but this was really going too far. To Prince Philip, dear, Aunt Fauna said. Well, I may have been a hillbilly, but I was no fool. I wasn't falling for that one. But to marry a prince, I pointed out, I'd have to be a princess, Aunt Merriweather said with a nod. And you are, dear, Aunt Fauna added. Princess Aurora, Aunt Flora said, and the look on her face told me she was not pulling my leg this time. This was very bad news. I may have lived deep in the forest, but I wasn't totally in the dark. Everyone in the kingdom knew about Aurora, the poor princess who had been cursed by an evil fairy. Rumor had it that any day now she would prick her finger on a spindle, whatever that was, and die. Not that I believed in fairies. Still, cursed is not exactly the sort of reputation a girl wants to go around with. No thanks, I told Aunt Flora. I'll pass. Give the job to someone else. But Aunt Flora was firm. Tonight, we're taking you back to your father, King Stefan, she cried. But I can't go, I cried. He's coming here tonight. It's our first date. I'm sorry, Aunt Flora replied, shaking her head sadly, but you must never see that young man again. Ouch. So this is the inside of a castle, I thought. It looks much bigger from the outside. Still, I couldn't help gawking a little. Silk carpets covered the castle floors and elaborate tapestries hung from the walls. The rooms were filled with all sorts of fine things, gilt mirrors and antique vases, oil paintings and marble statues. There was even an indoor toilet. I thought the king and queen must own everything but the moon. My aunts led me into a room as big as our whole cottage. A huge fire popped and crackled in the hearth. As Aunt Flora settled me on a velvet cushion, Merryweather bolted the door behind us and Fauna shut the drapes tightly. And now, said Aunt Flora somberly, the crowning touch. Pulling a thin wand from her sleeve, she waved it over my head, and suddenly a golden crown appeared, right out of thin air. She placed it on my head. Well, I thought, looking at my reflection in the mirror, wouldn't the chipmunks get a kick out of that? But thinking of the chipmunks reminded me of the forest, and the forest reminded me of the cottage, and that reminded me of the cute, messy boy who was probably waiting for me this very minute. I started to sniffle again. Now, dear, don't cry, Aunt Fauna said, which only made me cry harder. I put my head down on my arms and I bawled like a billy goat. Let her have a few minutes alone, I heard Aunt Flora say. Then their little footsteps pattered across the floor and the door closed shut behind them. Suddenly the room felt cold. Lifting my head, I saw that the fire had gone out. A few thin wisps of smoke curled from the cinders. As I watched, the smoke turned green. Suddenly, within the smog, a glowing orb appeared. The orb floated in the air, heavy and green, like an apple without a tree. Now I was curious. Wiping my eyes on my sleeve, I walked over to the hearth and peered inside. The hearthstones shimmered, then vanished right before my eyes. In their place was a long, winding staircase. Fancy that, I thought. A staircase in the hearth. What won't these royal types think of next? The little green orb bounced in the air. Let's go, it seemed to say. So, gathering up my skirt in my hands, I followed it up the stairs. Up, up, up I climbed. It seemed like I might climb all the way to the moon. I started to wonder if the king and queen actually owned that too. But the staircase didn't lead to the moon. It led to a small, round room, high at the top of a tower. The green orb hovered in the center. Then, with a sudden poof, it vanished. In its place stood the oddest piece of machinery I had ever seen. It had 4 legs and a big wooden wheel. At one end there was a thingamabob wrapped in wool, which stuck straight up in the air. The tip of it looked very sharp. Just then I noticed a tall, thin woman standing in the corner of the room. She was elegantly dressed in a long black gown, but her skin looked rather green. She looked like she could use some fresh air and exercise. Go on, she said. Touch the spindle. So that's what a spindle is, I exclaimed. I always wondered, and without thinking, I reached out my hand. Well, it was very sharp. As I looked at the drop of blood welling on the tip of my finger, my last thought was, Princess Aurora does have a nice ring to it, and then everything went black. The Man of My Dreams, Part 2. My dream prince was tall and handsome and so romantic. He had twinkling eyes and a kind smile, and his hair was full of leaves, and his clothes were damp and muddy, but I didn't mind. He took me in his arms and looked into my eyes, then he leaned forward and he kissed me. My eyes flew open. The cute, messy boy from the woods was standing over me. His hair was sweaty and his clothes were torn and rumpled. He smelled like a horse, but his brown eyes shone like moonlight, and his dimples looked deep enough to mine for gold. What a pity that I have to marry a prince, I thought. I hate to break this to you, I whispered, but I'm already engaged. But the boy just smiled and kissed me again. Then he took my hand and led me down that long, long staircase. As soon as we reached the bottom, everything became very confusing. A room full of people in fancy clothing was staring at us and clapping. An elegant man and woman wearing crowns rushed forward to embrace me. These must be my parents, I thought. Then who was that little fat man in the crown over there? And why is everyone so happy to see this peasant boy from the woods? But when people started calling him Prince Philip, I put two and two together. The boy from the woods really was a prince, my dream prince, and I've been right all along. You do have to dream a little more than once before it comes true. You have to dream it like 9 times to be exact. Like I said, I'm smarter than people might think. Philip and I got married right away and moved into a great big castle built by his father, King Hubert, the fat little man in the crown. No one calls me Briar Rose anymore. These days my name is Princess Aurora, but I tell most people to just call me Princess. It sounds so royal. Philip and I have had a great time getting to know each other better. He's always making up funny stories. For instance, the way he tells it, he fought through a forest of magic thorns and battled a fire-breathing dragon, all just to kiss me. Ha ha, I say, and that goose we just bought lays golden eggs. He's such a kidder. The end.